Namaste and welcome to the second season of Future Fit Corporates. My name is Bhavana Issar and I'm the founder CEO of Caregiver Saathi. In this season, we are going global and shifting the narrative. Caregiving is not a career obstacle or something that organizations must accommodate. It's a leadership accelerator. And through candid conversations with corporate leaders, consultants, and change makers, we explore how caregiving shapes resilience, empathy, and innovation. Let's discover what it truly takes to build workplaces that don't just include caregivers, but recognize that caregiving experience is an asset. Because the future of work is not just tech, female, or inclusive, it's compassionate, it's innovative, and therefore caregiver friendly. Welcome to Future Fit Corporates. Greetings of the day. I would like to welcome you for another conversation around the theme of Future Fit Corporates. As we've spoken many times in this season of Future Fit Corporates, we are looking at how is it that workplaces, organizations need to change, transform, as we keep in mind the changing nature of not just the talent demographics, but also our evolving needs and needs that might impact the coming generations. One of the biggest factors that's going to impact all of us, especially the coming generations, is the fact that people will live much longer and will need to be cared for more than ever before. We don't even know what the circumstances of aging and geriatric-related conditions are. At the same time, work and productivity and efficiency and economies have to continue. Children have to be born, the aged have to be taken care of, and work must go on. Dreams and ambitions must also be pursued. What does this mean for people who understand organizations and would like to craft workplaces that are both transformative, innovative, as well as resilient? I have with me today Sheela Sukumaran, who is a senior consultant and client relationship executive at Mercer. She has more than 20 years of experience in HR and technology consulting with a focus on US technology clients for over a decade. Sheela joined Mercer 8 years ago as a global technology industry leader and has since supported our tech clients for Mercer in addressing people challenges and building future talent and reward strategies by leveraging Mercer's innovation-driven tech workplaces research. Since 2019, Sheela has been a client executive responsible for relationship management and revenue growth at several of Mercer's large tech clients. As a senior client relationship manager, she acts as a trusted advisor and drives strategic alignment. For Mercer services with the client's business priorities. Through her consulting career, Sheela has worked extensively with multinational clients, driving global business and HR transformations in the US, India, and Europe. She has also driven strategic change and communication initiatives for her clients to enable successful technology adoption across finance, engineering, supply chain, and HR business functions. Prior to joining Mercer, Sheela has led tech industry. Sheela was the lead tech industry director at PwC US. She is based in San Jose, California. More importantly, Sheela is my senior from XLRI, a friend and someone who I respect for her professional expertise. I'm very, very excited to have this conversation with you. Welcome, Sheela.
Well, thank you for having me, Bhavna, and it's indeed great to join you on this podcast. And yeah, we've known each other for a long time, so it's been amazing to watch your journey, and you've done such a phenomenal job, and it's an honor to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for making the time. I know that you keep crazy hours, but you're an expert that I have been very, very keen to, to have in this conversation, because I think that you will bring a perspective that most of us can learn from, and many organizations can get their thinking hats on. So for starters, I fumbled through your resume. I'm sorry about that, but I'd like for you to share with our audience something about you that your resume does not say.
I think I've had an interesting journey. I think after graduating from business school, I started out inside the organization in HR roles. There was a time in my career where I took a career break, and we'll talk about that. And then I moved to the United States, and that's when I sort of flipped what I was doing and started working more on the client-facing side. And so I think when I look at my career, having those early years inside the organization have really been very helpful in understanding where my clients are. But at the same time, being on the business side also makes me appreciative of what are some of the constraints and thoughts that go into how programs are budgeted and how organizations need to prioritize their resources. So I do think that's been that it wasn't intended, but it has been an interesting background for me to be able to leverage in how I think and operate. The other thing I think you would not see in my resume is that I have 2 daughters, and I live in San Jose, California. I've been here now about 17 years, I think. So it's been a while. And I have a couple of cats that they're the joy in my life, and I paint when I'm not working. So that's about me.
Yeah, I think you're one of the most incredible watercolor painters that I know. And I think, thank you for sharing that, because it gives a whole new dimension to who you are. I'd like to start by asking you, how do you relate with the idea of caregiving, caregivers, and caregiver Saathi before we dive deep into the other questions?
Yeah, sure. I think caregiving really resonates with me, and more so, I think, as I, get older, and you've sort of gone through the journey of raising children, and that is a different type of caregiving. And then when you have older parents and you're watching out for them, that's a different kind of caregiving. So I think it's an integral part of all our lives, and we encounter it differently. There's definitely a situational aspect to it. And I think the most important part of what Caregiver Saathi is doing and is shining the light on caregivers, right? And who are not often the folks that attention naturally goes towards. But these are, members of our families. These are, we're healthcare workers. There's an assortment of people who form the caregiver community, and it's great to be able to look at this community and talk about how can we empower them, how can we make them more whole, because there's definitely an asymmetry to being a caregiver, right? Because you are doing more heavy lifting, and in some ways sometimes you don't really fill your own cup, right? And being able to focus attention and bring them to the center of the conversation is an important thing. And I applaud you for doing that, Bhavana.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that.
I think the fact that it resonates and it goes home, it rings home for most of us, one way or the other, um, makes it a universal concern. Of course, there are cultural nuances. For someone like you who has had an initial career in India and then a significant one in the US, and you oversee a large global, interface, I'd like for you to share your caregiving journey and how have you experienced as you look back being supported as a caregiver? Some things that may have worked well, some things that may not have. How do you look back at it?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think if I look back at my caregiving journey, I would say maturely that started when I had my first child. And it was different between my two children because when I had my first child, I took a career break, and it was different reasons. But one of them was certainly that I wanted to, devote a lot of attention to my to raising my child, and I think taking that time off made a big difference because I did not have to worry about balancing work responsibilities. And of course, it's always a trade-off, right? So there's a part of you that also now has stepped away from being in the workforce. But my intention was at the time that I would take a break and then go back to work. And as it turned out, I took the break in India and then went back to work in the United States. So it was a bigger change than I had planned for. But my experience itself, having a supportive spouse, I would say this was my first win in a way, because, as I moved, my husband and I were pretty much responsible for raising our young one. We moved to the United States when she was barely 3 months old. And as you would imagine, as new parents, first-time parents with a young one, it was quite an adventure. And I think I'm really grateful that my husband's been, with me every step of the way. And I think the early days, I do remember being hard physically because not only because I was recovering, but also you don't get a lot of sleep as a new parent, right? And not having to, get to work in the morning helped me a lot because I could just roll with the, with the flow with my daughter. It changed when I went back to work. And I went back when she was about 4 years old. And as it turned out, the job that I did take up put me on the road a lot, right? And so I was, one of those consulting folks that would get on a plane every Monday morning and come back on Thursdays. And once again, I think, having a supportive husband was phenomenal because he dialed down on his travel. And I think of that as a very different phase, where I was on the road. I think psychologically that is hard because my child was still young. She was 4 years old, but she had started school. So in that sense, she did have, a place to go to. She wasn't at home, but it was hard as a mother to be away in that way. But I also think that was a time that I, thought about caregiving a little more because I could see that my husband was leaning in. And I was never worried that, she would not get care. I was more concerned that he would be depleted because he was working and taking care of her. So I would spend a lot of my time and I'd come back. So I'd come back Thursday evenings. And a lot of my time would be to get things done in the house, cook, make sure there was food in the house for the next 4 days. And that because I wanted to support him and make sure that anything that I could do, I would do before. So, he could take care of our daughter without having to worry about things. So there was, I think it was the first time I could see the asymmetry and there was a real trade-off, right? Because when I was at home and I was not working, there wasn't a trade-off really, outside of, just feeling, oh, okay, I'm not working right now. But this was a real trade-off, right? So I think that was to me the first time I was, both grateful that I had a spouse who was so supportive and,
Yes.
taking care of the child, but also being very cognizant that, one of us was leaning in more, right, at the time, in a way to compensate for the absence of the other. But that was a phase. I think we moved on from that, and then I was able to get into something that was less travel intense. And then my second daughter was born, and that was a very different journey, because this time I was not taking a career break. Of course, I took my mat leave, but I got back in about 3 months, 4 months, and I did get help. So we had a nanny. So I think we were better organized, having gone through the process. But I would say at this point, what to me was more supportive, this time I could, I really leaned on my organization to support me. And I was still a consultant. So, a lot of my time was spent at my clients. And I think I was very fortunate at the time to work with, and again, you work with different clients in the course of a year. So it's not always with just one client, but I was fortunate at that time to be in a fairly long-term program with a really good client, who was very, very supportive. And you find ways to make it work, because, we used to have this concept, and it's not that unique. I think everybody does it, but working in time boxes, where there's a recognition that, when you get home and you have those 2 hours that, when you have to do the homework and you have to take care of dinner and all of that, you sort of prioritize that. And then about 8:30, you snap back, and then, and then you continue to finish your work, right? And so it's a lot, it is intense, but I think that's how we made it work. But I appreciated that. I really appreciated that I could have that flexibility, and that understanding, because you can't do that on your own. You do need team members and leaders to support that in the moment, right? I think when we talked earlier, you were talking about how there's the broader direction of saying the right things, but I think there's where the rubber meets the road is in situations like this, when you are that parent who hasn't had sleep all night, and you go to work, and do you get the grace in that moment from the team you're working with or the leader you're working with? And if you do, then it's all great. If you don't, then none of that stuff really matters, right? Because in that moment, it's not real. So yeah, I think it's I've sort of done the whole part of not only acknowledging and appreciating it. Obviously, it all starts at home. You do need a supportive spouse, and if you're blessed to have grandparents in the mix, that's always wonderful. Of course, because we were far away, that was not something we could have on a consistent basis. We did have parents visit us, but I think we found the help we needed, and I was fortunate to a large extent to be in environments where I was supported.
Yeah. So I noticed that there was a reference to the unpaid care work that women have to do, and the guilt that we feel because there's a subtle expectation that you would do it. And it's a great thing to have a supportive partner, especially when you're bringing up children. Children need to also see role models that both genders are involved, both the parents are involved in both careers as well as caregiving. And I'm sure there were changes. So you saw not just your own journey, you would have seen your colleagues and team members. And over time, many things change and shift. And some things that are yet to change. I'd like for you to give us your perspective on how you have seen caregiver-oriented policies taken up by workplaces, over time. So in your experience, you would have seen perhaps an arc or
a shift? Take us through some of that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's a good segue, I think, from, everything that I was telling you was it's at least 14 years away, because my younger one's 15 now. And I have been, it's been really great to watch how organizations have evolved their approach towards supporting caregivers. I think, again, I've also live and work in California, which as a state tends to emphasize from a statutory perspective, supporting especially new mothers and even other programs. So there's a context to all of this, right? That you do have both at a country level and in the case of US at a state level, there could be statutory requirements that ensure that employers are thinking very concretely about how they're supporting caregivers. But I think what I see that was not mainstream at the time that I was a primary caregiver now is how much flexible work, for example, has become more of a mainstream offering at employers. I don't believe this was the case 10, 15 years ago. And again, when I go back and look at the time that I had, I think flexibility was the thing that mattered most, because, I was willing to work around the corners, but there were just these times that I needed to be available, as a caregiver. And I think being able to create that as a standard, and I think flexible work policies have been phenomenal, in helping. And it's not just, obviously it's, new mothers for sure, but I also think it's others, right? You could be taking care of a child with special needs, or you could have an older parent at home that needs care. Being able to move your work units around in a way that helps you balance out your responsibilities, I think is a huge change I've seen. And I think COVID kind of accelerated that, right? I did see a lot of organizations sort of become more comfortable with the idea of flexible work, which did not happen before that, because there was this expectation that you came into office and you clocked your time. So flexible working, for sure. I think at a programmatic level, I think what I've seen very favorably change is things like leave policies, right, which are now, which have been extended to accommodate different situations, right? It's not just medical leave, it could be leave to take care of a sick, child or a sick family member. So there are program-based initiatives that and again, all of these things have to be planned and budgeted and things like that. So I think every time you put a program out, it's a big win, because you've crossed all of those hurdles, right? So I think at a program level, for sure, leave policies, even backup care, things like that have become, it wasn't that they weren't there, but I think they're far more mainstream at this point, which helps people, employees who are caregivers, whether they're men or women. The final thing I would say, which I've seen change, is it's more of what I'd call situational care, right? The common situations were always, you always had mothers, with young children. So there was always this element of that being a situation, but then you grew out of it because the children grew older. But there are some situations that you don't grow out of, right? It could be if there is a health condition, or if there's a special needs situation. And so what I'm seeing a lot more now is a situational lens to caregivers, right? To say, okay, how are we going to help, for example, parents of autistic children? Or how are we going to help parents with, who may have a family member with a chronic condition, right? So it's not just that one and done, you became a parent and then you went back and everything was fine. It's also looking at it. So I think there's sophistication there of recognizing that there are different situations which have to be planned for differently. And there's an ecosystem, right? Employers can't do everything, but there are service providers who'll do it, or there could be government programs that support. So it's being able to just harness, all of that in a way that an employee feels supported when they are trying to navigate.
Yeah. I really like the use of the expression going beyond situational support. to recognizing that this is an ongoing part of, perhaps a significant part of your workforce. It's not a one-off. It's not event-based. It is going to be a significant part. And therefore, what does it mean for workplaces? I think that's well articulated. There is an overlap with what is seen as well-being in general. There is also an increase in the idea of well-being. I don't think 20, 25 years ago, this term was used as frequently with workplaces as it has been. Since COVID, of course, it has accelerated. Now, while there was a very heightened idea of well-being and a definite skew or asymmetry, I like that word too, towards saying that, there is a mental health concern, there is an impact on the well-being in terms of psychological well-being, not just physical well-being. How have you witnessed some of the well-being related initiatives implemented, and challenges in implementing, some of these initiatives, because they may be seen as nice to do things?
Yes. And that's exactly right. I think well-being has evolved a lot. I also still think that if you ask what well-being means to 3 different people in the same organization, you're going to get different answers, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the number one challenge with well-being, that how do you create an operational definition of what that means in the context of an organization, right? And where do you draw that line, right? Because, you're as an employer, there's, you have the workforce coming in, but then they also have lives outside the workplace, which also impacts their well-being. So where is that boundary? So I think we're getting better at it in terms of putting a finer point of saying, what is well-being exactly? Is it just a nice to have where I want to see employees, just not having a lot of worries? Or is it something more concrete? In my experience, I think as organizations have become more concrete in the way they define well-being, it is easier then to be more targeted, right? And move from that nice to have to a need to have, because now you know what you mean when you say, this is what well-being means to us. What I've seen over time, well-being has kind of gone from what was somewhat physical to start with, saying, well, I want people to not have a lot of stress. I want to make sure that, there's safety. And then it sort of grew to become take care of behavioral and, psychological aspects, which very rightly so, because a lot of well-being is grounded there. And eventually, I think it's come now to a place where you also have financial well-being, right? And thinking more in terms of how financially secure are my employees, right? And so it's in that sense, I think it's become more comprehensive as an approach. And where employers have been able to do that, they've also been able to peel back that onion and say, what is it that we need to do? Because again, it's not the same for everybody. There's a situational aspect to it, right? When you're an early stage worker, your concerns are different. As compared to being a more mature worker. And, if you take something like financial well-being, for example, retirement readiness is a big part of that. But often if you're a 20-something employee, that's not what you're thinking about, right? But at the same time, that is the time you lay the foundation, right? That is the time you lay a foundation for. So how do you make sure that you take employees on that journey with you? So the first step, I think the biggest challenge that I see is almost upstream of education, right? That not only what does this mean, but what does it mean for you, right? When we say financial wellness, if I'm somebody who's, say 27 and I'm, 3-4 years in the workforce, I may not really relate to the idea of retirement, but it's important for me to be aware that through the, whether it's 401k plans or whatever retirement programs you may have at the workplace, to be able to understand that what is that power of compounding? What are the things I can do today which will prepare me for an early retirement or a sound retirement, and how employers contribute to that, right? So, I think education is almost the first step. In every area, I would say financial is more obvious because there's almost a, there's a mismatch, right, of what people prioritize and where what they need to be thinking about. But physically as well, right? You have things like physiotherapy and programs like that. But how can you be more upstream and say, how do you take good care of yourself, right? How do you have, focus on your nutrition? How do you focus on, having annual health checkups so you're able to catch things early, if anything? How do you do weight management? It's just many of those things. And, you'd comment about longevity. I think that's a big part, that people are living longer. And it becomes even more important, therefore, to maintain good health and set the foundation for good health, right? Because you're going to be driving this car for a long time. You may as well take good care of it. And then, of course, the behavioral piece, which I think, it's been very heartening, right, to see that has become so much more central to the conversation than it was 10 years ago. But again, there also this value in education to be able to understand, what do we mean when we say behavioral or mental well-being, and how can you get in some practices, right, in place which give you the advantage in the long run, right? Whether it's mindfulness or even healthy things like meditation, taking walks, things which have that value, which you may not necessarily attached to it, and you may sort of go more as a resolution factor to these programs, where you say, oh, I'm not feeling mentally all there, I need to talk to a counselor. And that's great, because that's something that organizations are good at in terms of getting programs in place, whether it's physiotherapy or counseling or even retirement planning. But how do you go more upstream to make sure that you're playing more in the preventative space, right, where you don't let some of these conditions happen? And I think there's a business case to be made there, which organizations that are doing this well are aware, because the earlier you're able to address many of these aspects, it is better for employees, because many of these conditions then don't come to bear. But also it's better for organizations, because every time you have a benefit, there is a cost attached to it, right? So there is a very practical element of saying, how do I invest more in preventative care, because it has better outcomes for my employees, but it also has a better value for the money that I'm spending. Right.
That's the piece that I'd love to talk a little more about, because increasingly in my experience, getting a bunch of people to invest in preventative care and actions and habits, because it's not just wealth that compounds, it's your health that compounds, it's your practices that compound, your social well-being, friends and family, relationships, are an outcome of what has compounded over a period of time, right? You cannot hope to be in your 50s and have a friend circle if you haven't invested in them in your 20s or 30s.
100%. Yeah.
Right. But one of the cliches is that it's easier to sell a painkiller than it is to sell vitamins or better habits.
Yes.
What would you say to the business managers who you would want to nudge? So you said that organizations are those who are doing this know that there is a business case for doing preventative care. There are many who are not. Could you give me some clue about what to tell them to invest a little more in preventative care?
Well, to start with, they should talk to Mercer.
All right.
But
I like it.
you know, I think this is it has become less and less of you know, an issue from where I see this you know, over time, because we now have a lot more data,
Yes.
because you know, it is, we are able to model out and model back, right? For example, I think everyone's aware that over the last few years we've had a sharp uptick in chronic conditions, right? Whether it's cancer, heart disease,
Yes.
even
Yes.
diabetes, right? And so we've been here of Ozempic or some of the you know, treatments that are now coming in to address these. They're very expensive, right? And also for patients, they are very painful if you're going through a lot of the treatments that you're going through, and not always the health outcomes cannot always be guaranteed if you're further down, you know, in the treatment curve. So we do have data now to show that if you look at your workforce, and because that matters, right? The average age of your workforce matters. If you have a predominantly young workforce, the kind of health conditions and you know, preventive care you would put in place for them is very different from if you've got you know, an older workforce. And the reality is the workforce is going to keep getting older unless you hire at a really high number at the entry level, which I wouldn't say organizations don't do. There are organizations that do that, but I think that's going to change. We're already seeing that, because as you're, you know, as we have more AI coming into the workplace, there is definitely a reconfiguration of saying how, you know, what kind of skills do we really need, because we're able to leverage technology, right? So I do think it's going to change the kind of people that come into organizations and the numbers of them, right, that come in. And we do have data to show that depending on the kind of workforce demographic you have, and then if you can, you know, you can model it out. You could say, you know, what happens if my workers skew this way or that way, if my gender balance skews a certain way. We also have data around where it's possible. So I think there are parts of the world where it's not possible to get data by ethnicity, but there are definitely markets where you can get even data by ethnicity, and there's a health element to that, because I think there is a genetic predisposition for certain conditions, and you're able to look at that and say, okay, this is my workforce. So it's a very targeted answer, right? That it's not a one size fits all, but if you were to build a business case, you could take your workforce and then start to say, what happens if I just meet the market standard, right? Let's say if there's an uptick of cancer diagnosis by 10%, what if that happened in my universe, right? And what does that look like? And it's very, you know, you get to that point very quickly that the earlier you do things like screenings, things like annual checkups, the better it is, not just for the employer, but also for the employee, because no one wants to be diagnosed with a stage 4 cancer. You'd rather catch it at stage 1 or 2, and you know, you have a really high chance of being able to recover from it. And it's the same thing with weight management, right? There's a big debate around GLP-1s, but the question really is that if you don't take care of your health, whether it's through nutrition or exercise and, you know, some of the healthier ways of living, you are, you know, there are multiple things that come on the other side, right? And the treatment's obviously expensive. So for employers, I think they are paying attention now, because this, you know, it is expensive. And, you know, many of these are insured benefits that take the premiums up, which means the cost of care goes up across the board. But also some of these are self-insured, where there isn't an insurance you know, plan for it. And employers are investing in it too, because they recognize that financially it makes sense to invest in some of these upfront, then pick it up on the back end of that. So I would say we're you know, in a pretty good place. And again, I recognize that this is not across the globe, right? So there may be there's definitely different maturity areas, but I think the data is there now to make that case, and it's fairly custom in the organization.
I really like that point, Sheela, because I think it is worthwhile when you are venturing into let's say a pioneering activity, you are looking at a question that you don't want to rely on past experience of, you want to shift it. I think it's worthwhile to engage an expert, Mercer in this case. But otherwise, in our daily lives, we would do that, right? We would say, okay, here's a new area. This is something new that I'm doing, whether it is shifting cities or it is changing your job or taking a new role. You consult with an expert to help you understand that new area. Look at surrogate data or information that may be directly applicable or that may be extendable, which is how you would model it. I think it is equally true for caregiving as might it be applicable for organizations or reward programs in organizations. And I think it is really interesting that reward professionals should look at or could look at a differentiated EVP if you were to say that we are thinking on behalf of employees not just today, but let's say 10 years down the line.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Absolutely.
what an incredible thing to offer, right?
Yeah. And if the goal is to retain employees and the goal is for you to have that longer term relationship with your employees, I think it's this just makes it more concrete, right? To say, okay, here's how we're building that future with you. And I would say employers have been doing that even with the work that they're doing with family building, for example, through fertility and things like that, where it's more long term. And the intention is to say, well, you don't have the need today, but you would have the need in 5 years. But we're thinking about that for you. Here's how you can be a part of it, right? So it's not just the employee running off and doing some thinking. It's also taking the employee with them. And that kind of brings us to the comment around, I would want to make around employee listening. I think that's the other part, which is very important, because while we can model out, age, numbers, conditions, all of that, I think it's a big piece of, what employees are concerned about, because both in terms of being able to take them along with you, because sometimes, like I gave the example of the retirement, concern for a young person, if that is not something that resonates with them, it doesn't have a lot of value for them, and you will not see a lot of adoption, right? So, and I think there's a balance there. Some organizations are more comfortable being paternalistic. Some organizations are not, right? So based on your culture, there may be a way to engage employees to be able to really have that dialogue of why certain things are being done, and so that they can then be a part of that journey. But on the other side of it is sometimes you may also surface other more pending, more immediate concerns, right? That you should, it's better to listen to and do something with that versus take this long-term lens out while the near term is not being, considered. So I think employee listening is a big other side of it. So while, there's the modeling and there's all of the scenario development, which is so important, especially when you think about budgeting and, setting aside resources, right? Because you need business cases for that. The other side of this is, how do you engage employees, and how do you make sure that you take them in that journey from awareness to adoption, right? And and then you get down to things like how am I communicating this benefit? How if my employee has questions, or is there a preferred way in which they would like to use it compared to how I'm providing it? There are a lot of other design and interface aspects to consider, which again, a robust employee listening effort can do for you. And I think technology is really our friend in that, because, historically there was this sort of, I will go ask employees what they think, right? And then you don't want to bother employees at a regular basis to keep asking them, what do you want this? Do you want that? But I think now, because we've got a lot more platform listening, where you can, there's a lot of sentiment analysis you can do based on what people are saying in Slack, what people are saying on social media, what people are saying on Glassdoor. So there's a way, I think, for employers now to listen to their employees in addition to asking them, because not, you know, that's not always the best approach, because sometimes people don't want to tell you. Yeah.
Yes. And when I look back at when I was an employee of an organization, sometimes I might not even know what to say. It's not just that I don't want to say or I feel there might be consequences. I remember when I was very young and I needed to provide some care at home, both for my father and some other people in my family. It was very hard. I didn't even know what I wanted. And I don't think I could have put it in words even if somebody asked me. So I really like this point around listening, that listening is more than asking the people. And it is about picking up the unarticulated, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah. You've given me, and I'm sure many listeners, a lot to think about. But let's take a shot at blue skying and say, how do you see the future workplace, look like, and what do you think might be the role of policies, practices? How do you imagine a futuristic workplace?
It's a great question. And I think at this point, there's a lot of hypotheses, right, on what that looks like. One of the advantages, I think, of being based in Silicon Valley is you get to see some glimpses of it here and there before it becomes more of a mainstream. And I would say that, you know, there's definitely going to be a big shift, right? We're already seeing organizations talk about how they are using technology to, especially in software, for example, 20 to 30% of the code that was written by human employees is now being written by agentic AI. So I think there's a big change that, and again, it'll come in waves. That's my expectation. I think we'll see it more in technology as an industry before it starts to percolate to others. But as you know, what's going to definitely change is we're going to see different work being done, right? Because there's a lot of work that we do which is more efficient when done with an AI agent. So I think it will change the composition of the workforce. It's going to change the kind of work that gets done. But I also think, and I'm an optimist, so I think there's a huge opportunity here for organizations to look at their workforces in a far more personalized way. Because of all of the data that we are going to have, I think we're going to see a lot more virtual care, right? In every way, I think there's going to be an increased virtualization, which makes things more accessible, which is also much more, I would say, flexible, because anytime you're working with a virtual interface, you can change it faster than you can change a human interface, right? Because then you have to train people, you have to rescript interactions. I think, with AI, we are able to get those changes done, and the other side of it is you can personalize it a lot more, right? Because you have data. And so I think it's very, it's going to be, a big change. And I think some of that, the seeding is happening right now. But it's going to be, what I would say is almost like a experience of one, right? Because I, as an employee, will experience my organization very differently from someone else who's at a different life stage and who has different preferences, because my organization is able to tailor, my experience in a way that lines up with, what I'm looking for. So, we talk about employee value propositions, and often the farthest you could go when you took something like that was to look at employee segments, right? And say, okay, what is my value prop for women executives? What's my value prop for India? But you're now, this allows us to get to a value prop
individual.
For one.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think that's it's coming, and I can't
Very
wait.
exciting. No, absolutely. I mean, like, it's a value prop for one. Wow. And I'm just I'm just thinking that what's your imagination of, for example, Sheila, who was caring for the first child or getting back to work or caring for two children today as in today's world, what's your imagination, the kind of support that such a parent would have in a workplace of today? Um, Paint a picture for us.
I think it has changed a lot, right? I think a parent, if I just teleport myself to today, I would say I would be able to expect a more flexible workplace from the get-go, compared to a time when, it was really, I would say, the coalition of the willing, right? I was fortunate to have a good leader. I was fortunate to have a good client. So it was great, but I recognized that it was not the norm, right?
Yeah.
And I think what has become different now is it has become more of a norm, and I think that takes so much stress out of the equation, right? That when you wake up in the morning, you don't have to worry about who's going to be the person that is going to deal with you not having had much sleep last night, or the fact that you woke up with a sick child and you need to trust a colleague to be able to pick up something that you were going to do. So I think culturally organizations have changed. I think program wise as well, I think their backup care, there's a lot of access to resources that I would have as a parent with young children. And I think it's as a result, I would also be more productive, right? And because I know that I have the flexibility to go back and finish work at a time when I'm not trying to balance multiple things. So I would be more productive. I think I would also be more engaged, right? I would lean in, I would do a lot more discretionary work, effort, because that's it again, it's a psychological contract, right? It's not just what the organization gives to me, it's also what I give to the organization. And when you have that sort of environment, you actually encourage people to lean in as well, right? So yeah, it was I think it would I am really happy that we are where we are. And as a mother of two daughters, I'm really happy that when they are at a stage as new mothers, when they are at work, they're going to have a very different world, and that's a wonderful thing to look forward to.
Yes, and it's a great point. I like an upward emotion to end a conversation with. I do think there are many things that you've given us to think about, and there are some things that I'd love to do a deep dive with you at some point, time permitting. But I'd like for you to give us any closing remarks, anything that you would wish for Caregiver Saathi, for me, for the world.
Oh, wow, that's a big one. Well, I think this is a journey, right? I think if we look back, and I'm sure, Bhavna, you have those moments where you look back 5 years, 7 years, and you see how much ground you've covered, right? And I think that's the most important thing when we are doing something so universal. And progress may not always come at a pace we want for it to come to. Many of us are impatient. But I think what's important is to be able to, see the progress that we've made and project this out, right? I think 5 years from now, if you and I have this conversation, a lot would have changed, right? So I think the way I would, the words I would leave you with is it is a very important journey that you're on. I think you're making a big impact, and I know you've been celebrated by our business school for the contributions you've made, and it's very well deserved. Really grateful for people like you who are leading the conversation, who are leading the agenda, because I think we need everybody in different roles being able to partner up on this. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to come and share my experience and my journey with you. And I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining in.
Wonderful.
Thank you for watching this episode of Future Fit Corporates. If today's conversation resonated with you, don't let it end here. Join the Future Fit Corporates Club or the FFC Club. Explore our full dossier and discover powerful blogs from our past speakers. Let's move beyond inclusion as a buzzword. Let's make diverse experiences, especially experiences of caring for others, caregiving, a leadership strength. Together, we can truly build not just a caring world, but future fit workplaces. Until next time, take care and let's keep the conversation on.